Well, last week I began my devotional by singing the classic Cat Stevens song from 1970, Father and Son, as we looked at the fatherly advice that was expressed in the passage. And in preparing for today's passage, I was pretty tempted to sing again, but I won't, don't worry. Because today's passage took me to another classic 70s song, Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. In the bridge, Robert Plant sings, "Yes, there are two ways you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on." Today's passage, Proverbs 4, verses 10 to 19. Press pause now, have a read if you're yet to do so. Okay, so again, we have a father talking to a son. You should be familiar with this theme as we go through the book of Proverbs. And then this time, the father is telling the son that there are two paths that we can choose. And this is also a common theme throughout the book of Proverbs and all of wisdom literature, actually. There are two ways to live. Two paths you can choose, two paths you can go by, in the words of Led Zeppelin. Let's look at the summary of these two paths. Verses 18 and 19. The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of day. But the way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know what makes them stumble. It's a big difference between those two paths, right? A massive contrast between the light and the dark, ever-increasing light or ever-deepening darkness. The father is standing before the son and saying, "You choose. What's it going to be?" And makes a pretty good argument for taking the path of wisdom, the path of righteousness, the path of God. And you see this plea. Make the right choice. Don't go the way of the wicked. Steer straight on the path of righteousness. And it's a big call to stay on that path. For any of us who are believers who seek to do this, it's hard work to continue to choose God's way, the way of wisdom, the path that leads to life and light, not darkness and death. The stakes are clearly high, aren't they? None of us like the sound of stumbling over unseen obstacles in deep darkness. But realistically, when we all see ourselves stumbling down these dark alleys more often than we'd like to. And this is where Jesus comes in. This is where we need to be reminded of the grace that he makes available to us. We may have strayed, but Jesus gives us the opportunity to turn home. Think of another famous father and son story that Jesus told, the parable of the lost son, or the parable of the prodigal son. The son callously takes all of his father's inheritance. He squanders it in wild living, betraying his family, his community, and his God. But he comes to his senses and returns home to a loving, gracious, forgiving, and generous welcome by his father. In this parable, the father, who is a picture of God for us, welcomes back the son who has ignored his wisdom, a son who has turned his back on the path of righteousness. And he does this because he's a God of grace. Yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on, because Jesus' death and resurrection make it possible for us to return. So God's wisdom gives us clarity to live well and to live wisely, how to center your life on God, but it also gives us hope and gives us a way back when we have strayed. There is still time to change the road you're on. But is this something we want to wait for? Is this something we know the opportunity's there at some point, so let's just wait to jump back on that road? Well, we got to remember that the call to wisdom, the call to living righteously, it's not just a ticket to a better afterlife. It's actually a call to a renewed life now, centered on God. If you're walking the way of the wicked, return home. The path of wisdom leads to a glorious conclusion, yes, but it is also paved with gold. Yes, it will be hard. It's the straight and narrow. It's the difficult path. It's the hard road, as Jesus says. It's a tricky road to navigate. But this road is the way of God's presence. It's the way of God's peace. It's the way of God's light and life. It's the path of joy. It's the path of hope. And so consider it more than just a means to an end in getting to heaven, but consider it the only way to live life to the full, the life that God had created you to live, and to make the most of the days that God has granted you, including today. What path are you walking today? In all your decisions, consider which path they are leading you down, and seek to follow the path of righteousness, the path of wisdom, in a way that will honour God and fill your life with His grace, mercy, and love. Go in peace to do so. God bless.